Avavatu sahanau bhunuktu sahaviryam karavavahai tejasvinavaditam astu mavadvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May our study be cooperative, fruitful, full of strength and energy. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So happy Mother's Day to everybody, even those who are not mothers. And so as usual, this is the Vedanta question answer series. So as usual, we'll wait a little bit and see if anybody has some questions.
I have questions.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the four Mahavakyas of the Upanishads?
So first we have to talk about the Upanishads themselves. Actually, during the week, there was a request that we try to go to some fundamentals, such as what is Vedanta, what is yoga? And so I think that's a good place to start. So Upanishad is a part of the Vedas. And to explain the Upanishads, that portion of it, we'll have to explain the Vedas themselves. As many of you know, the word Veda has a root, vid, to know, to see. Our English expression, vision, and we're on a video, all this comes from this same root word. And what is the importance of it? That whatever knowledge we have is something that is seen either metaphorically or literally with the eyes. When we look at this world in front of us, the first thing that comes to our mind is, what is this? Why should it be there? Now, the why should it be there in the Vedas is never answered. I was in a discussion group earlier this morning with some Muslims, and they were asked, I was simply there as a silent observer, but they were asked, why did God, why did Allah make a universe? It seems that the universe is not really very perfect. Why should he do that? And there are many theological answers that came up, but the final conclusion was, that's his business. In other words, I don't know. And so why this world is here, we don't know, but we take what is here and we try to make some sense of it. So this is actually called modern science. Skio, the capacity to know. Then what would we know? We have to take what is seen, what is heard. We have to rely on the world of the senses. And so some subtle understandings will have to be there. For example, we can see when leaves blow on a tree and when a branch moves, it's easy to establish it has nothing to do with the tree. The tree itself is not the moving agent. Something is moving it. We call this the wind. But then what is that? We can't see it. We can only see its effects. Electrical energy, we can only see its effects. We can't actually see, there it is. We can taste it a little bit. That's possible. The whole capacity to taste anything on the tongue is orientated around the fact that there are electrical sensitive impulses there. So the first investigations are about this world, and naturally, scientific questions require scientific answers, and we find this encapsulated in the Vedas. So that portion of the Vedas then tells us about physics and tells us about cosmology. That portion is called Samhitas, Samhita portion. We can put it here on the board. Now, many people look at the Samhitas and say these are hymns of praises, these are mantras. And that would also be true. But hidden amongst the coded language of the Vedas, of these Samhitas, is actually an understanding of what is the universe itself and how does it work. You can see that, that's fine. This coded language has been misunderstood because the next advancement in the Vedas that is revealed by the rishis or sages or seers, those who saw the truth through the capacity to observe and concentrate. Concentration is a yielding mechanism whereby we know what is there. Something is revealed. Something that is revealed always has to be there in the first place. But the Brahmanas is the ritualistic portion. And by the time the Brahmanas come along, describing the ritualism of the Vedas, then a slight misunderstanding is made. All the intricate science of the Vedas is somehow more literally interpreted. For example, devas are revealing factors. What we call Vishnu, for example, means the whole universe, the whole of the existence, the whole of the cosmos. By the time it comes to the Brahmanas, the various stories of the Vedas and the implications of the Vedas, the Samhita portion, is now more literally understood, and some misunderstandings are there, and that gets translated through into the Greek world. So many stories that arise there, we find also echoed in the Greek world, but we find them in this misunderstood stage of the development of the Vedas. Nevertheless, the ritualistic portion is necessary, because how do we control nature? Nature, from the human point of view, requires food. Now everybody is busy doing things. You require a dedicated portion of society to go and pray for food. And the type of prayer will be a mental movement, a scientifically understood mental movement that shifts all the forces of nature around that previously were registered as deities. And that combination now produces the world that we have, condenses into the world that we have. These are then called the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas should be studied by householders, because it is for the welfare of society that the householders have to operate. Any exclusion to that, any exclusion of any segment of society will be completely selfish and therefore not in accordance with social harmony that is called dharma. But the Samhitas, students have to study it. And they study it through rote learning, and that gives them a background in character building. So the brahmacharis in the forest hermitages for 12 years will study all of that, study the Vedas. The whole of the knowledge in those early days was encapsulated in these Vedas. But as time goes on and all household duties get fulfilled, the forest dwellers will want to pick these up and find a deeper meaning in it. And these people are typically living in the forest, and these forests are called aranyakas. These are the aranyakas, that portion of the Vedas. These three aspects are all to do with this world, making sure that this world is good and solid and understood, and a good place to live, all in harmony. But then what about the afterlife? That also is catered for. So it ensures a good this life and a good afterlife. Thinking people will not be satisfied with that. Thinking people will want to know Is there something more? Is there some area of immortality that we've missed? So after these investigations about the outside world, layered as the physical, layered as even the psychological, the movement of thought that can produce results to the extent that nature itself can be manipulated. Don't think that the gods are in charge. We are in charge of the gods. We can manipulate it through mantras. And so mantra was a means, it was a tool, it was an instrument, scientifically understood and applied. But is that the end to it? Is there something that is behind all of that? These questions have to be asked. So when we talk about the Mahavakyas, we're talking about brief statements that when repeated will give an understanding of this deeper dimension. Some examples. Well, the most quoted one is Tattvamasi, thou art that. We have to explore what that means and come to a conclusion about it. We have these Mahavakyas, these great sayings, because by repeating these Mahavakyas, these great sayings that encapsulate something, we have a view, an internal insight into the whole discussion that is contained in Upanishads themselves. These are distributed in the various Upanishads. What are these Upanishads? These Upanishads come next, looking into life in a deeper way, trying to find a deeper reality. It was taken that in some portions of these Brahmanas, in some portions of these Aranyakas, and even separately, inquiry has to be made about another form of knowledge. All the rest gets categorized into what we call karma kanda. That is that portion of the Vedas which is designed for this life. And karma comes from the root kra, to act, to do, and to think. No action takes place without a thought movement. But what about that area which is behind all of that? And whatever is behind me must be behind everything. There's an interesting dialogue, a story in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, that immense body, a forest of literature. And the story is about an event where the wise Rishi, King Janaka, holds a kind of forum, discussion forum, and all the wise rishis and sages and people with a high reputation for knowledge are gathered. The great sage Yajnavalkya is there. And the king, with a sense of generosity and fun, says, I have a whole herd of cows that I can distribute to the person who's the wisest among us. Not only that, but attached to these cows is some silver, so that when the cows become old and no longer yield milk, wealth in those days were measured in cows, then you can still support them. So the slaughter of cows, that humanitarian aspect, that we shouldn't slaughter cows, is still there. Even in their retirement, you can look after them because they are like the mothers. It's Mother's Day today. We honor the mothers because the mother's love is a flowing thing. A mother's love is always a flowing thing. And the cow, which is also a mother, also supplies a flowing thing, continuous milk to the calf. We consider God's grace in this way as a flowing thing. It's the reason why that flowing thing should be loved, what we call God, because that thing is lovable, because we see the flow of grace everywhere. Now, of course, Yajnavalkya tells his student, please take these cows off. And there's a huge uproar because the difficulty is, by taking the cows, you've just declared, I'm the wisest among all of you. And then they challenge, do you think you're the wisest among us? Now, you can't admit I'm the wisest because it means you're not the wisest. It means that you are proud and your ego surfaces and you say, yes, I am the wisest. So it's not the mark of a wise person to make an admission, I'm the wisest. So he very cleverly puts the burden of proof on them. And he says, well, if you don't think I'm the wisest, then prove that I'm not the wisest. So they fire questions at him, very pointed questions. Now, the other day was Women's Day, and Women's Day, I pointed out that in the ancient Vedic times, women were honored. Women were given equal rights. They had as much equality to be studying the Vedas as anybody else. And so one very famous rishi, female rishi, she comes, Vachatnu, and she asks some pointed questions. So this is a passage actually from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It's the third section, and it is chapter 8. So the whole dialogue goes by her saying, and Yajnavalkya had already said, having answered a number of questions, that if you are asking the question and you yourself don't know the answer, your head will fall off. So she doesn't want that. So Vachakvi has said, all right, to the assembly, venerable Brahmins or Brahmanas, I shall ask this Yajnavalkya 2 questions. It'll be like an archer stringing a bow, and they will be pointed right at the target. These are pointed questions. 2 of them I will ask. Then she says, if he answers these, then nobody can question his wisdom. Everybody should be satisfied. None of you can defeat him then, because these are superb arguments that are evoked by these questions. Now the question, background to the question is this. If you are investigating in a scientific way what is existence, and you're looking at the universe itself, then it's evident that everything exists within a framework. Time and space is there, but what is that? These are very profound scientific and deep questions, because the whole nature of gravity is now being asked. Why do things spin? Why do things fall? What's behind it? And it was well known that the earth had a below to it and above to it. That it wasn't something that was there like a dome and everything else is around it. It wasn't understood in those terms. The rishis had already understood the basis of the cosmos. But when you look into the sky, you see vastness in space. Our galaxy of the Milky Way happens to be in a vast blank area, void. And this void, when we say void, is not that nothing is in it, but it is a patch in the whole universe that only has about 16, 17 galaxies. And that means that the density of this galaxy in which we sit is much less than we find elsewhere. Why? What is the reason for it? These questions can be thought on. And today, people are still thinking on these questions. Now, Isaac Newton felt that gravity was inexplicable. And so he understood a relationship between the various forces, force, acceleration, velocity, so on, were all understood, mass, were all understood at this local earth level. And by extrapolating that, we can discover the principles of this gravity everywhere. But still, he never made any explanation. By the time Einstein comes along, he sees that it is like a fabric. And this is based on his earlier understandings of what is time, what is space. And so time and space, what are those things? He thought of these as a fabric, like a woven cloth. And people who demonstrate the idea of gravity will understand that, or make an illustration, something like a trampoline. Some piece of rubber suspended at four corners with a spring. Then if you put a weight in the center, you'll find a hollow. And any other object on the mat will fall into this hollow. First by moving around it, and eventually by some concentric circles fall into the center, because it'll have its own momentum going around. And the mathematics works out fine, the observation works out fine, and so far we assert it is fine. So in any explanation of this time and space, earlier we had thought space was an expanse separate, must contain some kind of medium, and then time was something separate. But he brings the two together as a fabric, the fabric of space-time. Now, here's a question that was asked. It says, Sahovacha aham vaitva. She said, as a warrior son of the Kashis, so she gives some identification to this Yajnavalkya, as or the Vedas might rise up against you. I have strung these two key questions. What are they? It says, first question goes like this. That, O Yajnavalkya, Yad Urdhvam, Yajnavalkya, of which they say it is above the heavens, means above the skies, and the earth, that which the people call the past, present and future, across what is that woven like warp and woof. Now we're talking of Mahavakyas, so we are only taking one of them so far. Can you imagine now this concept of, we take for granted there is something woven like warp and woof, and it incorporates space and time. What is the language being used here? It says, what is that above the heaven and below the earth? The same thing is above and below in all directions. That which the people call the past, present, and future, that which is time. It just encapsulated these two concepts, space and time. And that which the people call the past, present, and future, across what is that woven like warp and woof, like a fabric going this way. You know, when you weave cloth, you put one thread in this direction, another thread in this direction, and you weave the two together and tie them in a knot, tiny knots. And this whole assembly of tiny knots and cloth looks like one thing. And you put it on. The shirt I'm wearing is woven like that. The clothes you're wearing is woven like that. Immediately, it's taken for granted that these are the discoveries. And then what is the answer? And every answer in these Upanishads will lead you inward. So what is the meaning of the Upanishad? It is generally, in a generalized view, called Vedanta. That is the end of the Vedas, not just the physical end of the Vedas, but also the final conclusion of the Vedas. The final conclusion means all the other issues about this world, about this life, about these problems, questions about the afterlife and the next life, problems about sowing and reaping, karma. If I do this, I'll get that. Preventing adverse circumstances and so on. Doing religion or embarking on prayer in such a way that we want a result. Please, Lord, give us this. Please give us that. And or may I have an improvement on this and that. So with all of those in mind, or things in mind, the final conclusion is that underneath that there is a layer. First of all, a physical layer. What is that? Something much more subtle, what can we discover? So Yajnavalkya replies in his scientific way. He says that it is all space. It is also all an area, undefined. And another way of saying that would be something that is akshara, something that is imperishable, is behind this. So he answers, that which is above the heaven, he repeats the question, that which is beneath the earth, that which is between these two, heaven and earth, and that which the people call the past, present, and future, because from their point of view, it looks like a moving train of events. Across space is that woven like whoop and woof. This whole fabric of matter is woven against space. A vast void, a vast area, just as we discover it in modern science. And she's happy with the answer, but it's not the final answer. So she said, when Yajnavalkya, of which they say it is above the heaven, is beneath the earth, that which is between these two, that which the people call past, present, future, across what is that woven like warp and woof? What is the underlying thing that penetrates space itself? Please tell me that. That is the ultimate. And he says, that which is above the sky, that which is beneath the earth, he's repeating the whole question. Between these two, sky and earth, that people call past, present, future. Across space is that woven like warp and woof. Across what is space woven like warp and woof is a difficult question. It's a difficult question because if Yajnavalkya doesn't explain it properly, if he says it's inexplicable, don't go to that area, then he lays himself open to the charge of non-comprehension. Means I don't know, I don't understand it. That's the danger. So he lays himself open to this, what is technically called a pratipatti. But if on the other hand, he attempts to explain what is inexplicable, he'd be guilty of contradiction. If you say something is inexplicable and then go to explain it, it's contradiction in terms. And so his reply is like this. The knowers of Brahman call the imperishable akshara. That is, it's not time, it's not space. Things with parts perish. Things over time come and go, and it's not that. But he's careful. He's saying the knowers of this principle, Brahman. Now there's a Mahavakya that says, Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. Because if this existence is true, it is true for everything. For what are we except as a woven thing ourselves? What is matter? Matter is a woven thing made from food. What is a cell, human cell of the body? We find it is a mixture of various parts held together by a membrane. And when you look at the membrane, we find exactly the warp and woof structure. We find an assembly of tissues, and we find inlets and outlets. Like a fabric, some things it will let in, some things it keeps out. What an amazing thing. You can't have a rule about one thing in the universe and exclude all the other things. You have to include everything. But before we identify this Brahmasmi, is this accurate? The knowers of Brahman say it. But who's a knower of Brahman? You can only say this Mahavakya, Brahmasmi, if you yourself fundamentally know it. Now, indirectly we know it. Indirectly we know it because nobody wants to die. Everybody wants to live. Why do we want to live? Why is this urgency in the COVID-19 crisis? Why is it so urgent that everybody should survive? and live beyond the age of 80, 90, and so on. Why is it that we take death as such a tragedy? I don't think it's a tragedy for the dying person. They're making a transition to another area. Why should we stop their progress onward? Is a way of looking at it. But you see, our difficulty is we're caught in this trap. We are caught in the psychological warp and woof of things, and we don't really understand the deep meaning of these Mahavakyas. And so far, two I have given you. One says, Tattvamasi, thou art that. What is that? When explaining the this and that in the Upanishad context, this means the world that these sections of the Vedas are dealing with. The world of tables and chairs and you and me, of social order, social disorder, physical difficulties concerning food, finance, welfare, and psychological difficulties of emotional ups and downs and aberrations, ways of dealing with the world, ways of approaching problems. So all of these come into the whole understanding of this world, this, because wherever you look, this, you can point in any direction, say this. But then underneath it, what is it? It is a that, indicating something that is stable. And this is described as akshara, imperishable. Can you think of anything in this world that is imperishable? No. When you look at the sky, does it look imperishable? From our view, yes. But we soon know that when we go out in modern times, beyond our atmosphere, beyond the short wavelength of our blue sky, is the only darkness. If you sit on the moon, you won't see any of the stars. It'll be black because the sun's wavelengths make it like that. So this blackness is there. The views shift and change. What is it which is that? Tattvamasi, thou art that. Brahmasmi, thou art Brahman. The knows of Brahman know it. But we can never declare it except as a principle. As long as we feel embodied, we can't legitimately declare these Mahavakyas. But we take them as the principle. In a sense, take them as a goal. So he says, the knows of Brahman, he puts it like that, Brahmana abhivadanti, the knows of Brahman call the imperishable. It is neither gross nor fine. That is in distinction from this. Everything we see in this world has a tangibility to the senses. It is gross, we can touch it. But there are some things which are fine. And just so we don't make a mistake, space itself is very fine. So all the subtle things are there and the gross things are there, and this is neither of them. It is not like cloth. It's not like the warp and woof itself. Neither short nor long. It's not within space. It has no dimensions. And dimensions anyway are relative. If you say this table is small, well, to an ant it is huge. To an elephant, it's less than small. So we're only referring to this world from our own reference point. And then he goes on, neither glowing red like fire. There are other things to see. The things that help you see is fire. Of course, today, the things that you see at night will be electric torch or electric light bulb. But it's not like that at all. Nor is it adhesive. It doesn't stick. It doesn't have surface tension like water. And it is neither shadow nor darkness. When we think nothing is there, then we think of blackness, night. You look out, who is there? Nobody is there. Nothing is there. No, not like that. Neither air, nor space. It's unattached to anything. And don't try and taste it, because without taste, don't try and smell it. There's no smell. In other words, it's not an object. And without eyes, without ears, without voice, nor is it a living thing like that, with various adapters, ears, eyes, and so on, to interpret the world. It's not like that. It's not human. Now, in our discussion earlier with the Muslim, they maintained, you see, Allah has no distinguishing factors. It's not like a person. You can't imagine this Allah. So far, so good. We have Brahman. But then they go on to say, this is a creator that made the world and gets angry when we disobey his laws. Now we put it into the box of human again. Still without eyes and ears and so on, but the human characteristic of jealousy and hatred and anger and creating the world in order for us to need that entity and please that entity. So without grasping the fundamental, we superimpose human qualities and ideas on such an entity. This is adamant. It says, please don't do that. There's no eyes, no ears, nothing like that. No qualities. And so it goes on, without voice, without mind. You say the voice of God. Without voice, without mind. No mind. Without radiance, without breath, without a mouth, without measure. The word for measure is the same as the word for Maya. It comes from the same basic root. Having no within and no without. It eats nothing and none eats it. Sometimes we mix up subject and object. The Swami likes bananas. Very nice. When will the banana like the Swami? The Swami eats bananas. When will the banana eat the Swami is a ridiculous question. There's a subject and object clearly defined. And we mix it all up. And therefore, to understand this, we go back to his statement, the knowers of Brahman. That's who knows it. And then, of course, so the passage is bringing out the imperishable aspect of this. It's neither a substance and has no attributes either. It's not the letter, but the supreme self. It's Aksharam Paramatma, Eva Na Varnaha. It's the changeless reality. In meditation, we connect with a changeless reality. In the depths of meditation, it is possible to know this Brahman. But first of all, we have to look at the indicators that are actually mentioned as not this. It's the not this that indicates the this. It's the not this that indicates more accurately the that, the tat of it. So why do we want to cling to life? Is because this changeless reality must be existence itself. When all else is gone, this remains. That is why the inference is there, plainly, why we don't wish to die, why we wish to carry on forever, why we feel we are existent. There's only one thing that we take for true, and that is we exist. We feel we exist because that's the fact of it. But what is this we? We have just eliminated most of what we assume we are. This entity has no eyes, no ears, and so on and so forth, in contrast to what we are or what we think we are. But what we think we are can be classified as object, as an objective thing. Then he goes on to say, truly, just so there's no mistake, Itasyava aksharaha prasane. Truly, at the command of that imperishable Ogargi, the sun and the moon stand in their respective positions. We know this exists because why else would the sun and moon stand in their positions, one reflecting the light of the other? The sun is there. The sun is a very unusual arrangement. If you look at most solar systems within our own galaxy and beyond, most of the solar systems are twin stars, two of them. We are very rare. We only have the one sun. We had other things which tried to be the sun, such as Jupiter, Saturn, and it's debatable whether they are planets or suns that didn't make it, that didn't radiate in the infrared properly. So they stand in their respective positions, and it's valuable to us because from the Earth geocentric point of view, we require both of these entities. All of our festivals are based on the lunar calendar. And all our energy and life is dependent on this one sun. If we had two suns, it would be awkward and difficult. So the heaven and earth stand in their respective positions, and at the command, as it were, you might say, as it were, of the imperishable, that has no voice, but in other words, its presence, and then its projected will, as it were, invisibly. These are what are called moments and hours, days, nights, half months, months, seasons, years. They all stand in their respective positions. If we go back to the earlier Vedas now, the Samhitas, we will find mention of the Adityas. We will find mention of the Rudras. We'll find mention of the Vasus. We'll find mention of Indra. We'll find mention of Prajapati. We can understand all these from the Upanishadic point of view, giving us the philosophical context of it. And that is what makes the Upanishads actually the Jnana Kanda, the knowledge portion of this. Karma Kanda on the one side, Jnana Kanda on the other. This is the knowledge portion, the portion that gives us that portion, as opposed to this portion. And these Upanishad, the Upanishad, Upa, Ni, to sit near the truth, to sit near this Jnana Kanda, this reality. Then at the command of this, coming closer to what we observe, some rivers flow to the east and some flow to the west. Snowy mountains are there. From there, flow goes to the west. In whatever direction each one flows is caused by that presence, that command. A command is an intention that brings us not only to existence, but consciousness. Why do we think? Why do we evaluate? How are you reasoning at the moment as the talk is going on? It is because your basic nature is consciousness also. And by the command of that imperishable men, that is people, praise those who give all the forces that come from it, all the manifested things, all the illuminating factors. Then they sacrifice to these. These sacrifices are described in the Brahmanas. And they sacrifice also ancestors as well. Why do we sacrifice at all? It is because the urge to do it is there, the presentation of the scenes is there, and the desire to do these generous, selfless activities are there. That means, therefore, also that there's some inexplicable area of love within us. Today is Mother's Day, so that love comes out as motherly love. When we take into account what we call here the Holy Trio, that's a very interesting thing, because the Holy Mother, that portion of the Holy Trio, is a living exemplar of this love quality. It is very interesting to see that Ramakrishna never founded anything. Ramakrishna had a band of young disciples around him, young boys, young devotees, some householders, and some who wanted to lead a dedicated life. These were not poor people. These were middle-class people, students, householders. Swami Vivekananda takes that and highlights the other people, highlights the poor. And so to understand Ramakrishna, what we do is we study Vivekananda first, his complete works, because he's saying, let us uplift humanity, uplift the masses, give them education. Education means not just breadwinning education, as Ramakrishna himself would have described, but also education that creates a calmness and equanimity of mind. Do that east and west. Uplift the masses in the east. Uplift the psyche of those in the west. Uplift the spirits of those in the west towards spiritual life, and uplift the spirit in the east so that they can be independent, that they can have food. When Swami Vivekananda, after his great success in America, comes back to India, many people thought, this is not Ramakrishna's message. Ramakrishna taught renunciation. He said, please reduce all your activities. But Ramakrishna was talking to those who are not impoverished. And now we see this great, great message coming of Vivekananda. And he himself had to surmount this obstacle because his own fellow monks were saying, we didn't hear this from Ramakrishna. No, you heard it. You weren't listening properly. Because how will you teach anything unless if the masses are starving, if the masses are uneducated? Lift that first. So that is a fundamental message. And then once that is done, Ramakrishna's message comes in, that of renunciation, purity. The purity, the knowledge that comes out in the Upanishads. But then Holy Mother combines all the whole thing. Vivekananda teaching the 4 yogas from what he had heard from his master. His master teaching the divinity of man and the possibility of accessing, and teaching the validation of the harmony of every path, every religion. Holy Mother comes, and what she's doing is she's practicing all these. She's telling us how to practice all of these 4 yogas. In Ramakrishna's life, there was a division. There's spiritual practice and then teaching. Like that, we can clearly segment the areas of his life. But Holy Mother, we can't find any such segmentation. So her message is love. And love is the culmination of this whole thing. So the practical portion of this is love. This is how we access this. And this Upanishad is saying, why don't we look at these things that we have been looking at it previously, the flow of rivers, mountains, the source of rivers that come from mountains, their direction, the impulse that we have to do good and be good, that is not inherent in animal nature. Not necessarily anyway, not to that extent, not to the generosity of spirit for the whole of mankind. Where is it coming from? And it is coming from this understanding, this aspect, and it's giving us clues and directions to our fundamental pure existence. That pure existence is termed prajna, consciousness, and that is also mentioned as a Mahavakya. So he goes on to say, whosoever in this world without knowing this imperishable performs sacrifices, worships, performs austerities, for 1,000 years his work will have no end, will have an end. In other words, if you follow this portion of the Vedas, it's okay, but don't expect to get immortality from it. Whoever, without knowing the imperishable, departs from this world is pitiable, because you'll be caught up in this an unsatisfactory cycle. You'll be caught up in this inconclusive goal that the original Vedas, that is the Karma Kanda portion of the Vedas, are indicating. And the one who, knowing this imperishable, departs from this world, who is a Brahmana, that is a knower of Brahman. What happens there? Truly, that imperishable is unseen, but is the seer. Unheard, but is the hearer. You're listening now. What is that which is truly behind the ear that is listening? The Upanishad puts it in a very systematic way. It is the ear of the ear, the eye of the eye. See, without eyes it sees, without ears it hears. There is no other seer but this, no other seer. Therefore, Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, and Tattvamasi, thou art Brahman. No other hearer but this, there is no other thinker but this, there is no other knower but this. By this imperishable is space woven like warp and woof. This fabric of space and time that we call body, this intricate way of thinking and evaluating is called mind. This matter that we see, regardless of whether it is in the outer corners of the galaxy or beyond, or this world here, it has its time and its seasons, that have its flow of rivers and mountains. Whatever it is, this imperishable is this space woven like warp and woof. It is the undercurrent, it is the substantial entity which is there. It is the substructure from which all this comes. You can see how profound these Upanishads are. And then, of course, the final conclusion to this, so profoundly answered, she then says, "O venerable Brahmanas, you may think it's a great thing. You got off lightly. If you get off from him through bowing to him, make a bow, make a humble salutation, and with that cost, you got off lightly. If you will defeat him in arguments about Brahman, he's answered these two pointed questions. One based on matter, energy and matter. The other one based on the undercurrent of it. And one leads to the other. Shankaracharya has something to say. He says that the same Brahman, on account of the differences in the limiting adjuncts, see, Upadhi Vedana is called differently. So he makes a commentary there. It's called differently. See, therefore, the unconditioned self, beyond speech and mind, undifferentiated and one, is defined as not this. Not this, not this. Neti, neti, not this, not this. And when it has the limiting adjuncts of the body and the organs, the products of ignorance, desire and work, it is called the individual ego. And when the self has the limiting adjunct of eternal knowledge and power, it is called the inner controller. These are various terms contained here in this Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, this Antarayami, this inner controller, the Supreme Lord, the same self, absolute, alone, pure, is called the imperishable Supreme Self. The self is everywhere, assuming different forms. And so for Shankaracharya, the differences are all traceable to these limiting adjuncts and to nothing else. So let me just describe. When we say Brahmasmi as one of the Mahavakyas, when we say Tattvamasi as one of the Mahavakyas, what we are saying is, the reason why we don't know this, according to Shankaracharya, is because there are small limitations. There are expressive limitations. The sun is one, the moon is one. The way we look at things is another, the eyes, the ears, all these things that are mentioned as that imperishable one is not this and not that. The this, therefore, is a presentation that is seen or expressed through these limiting adjuncts. If we put it in a reverse, and I've said it a number of times before, what we call these upadhis, translated as limiting adjuncts. You can imagine here, there's a flow of something, and the flow inhibits the import of it. For example, the largest man-made lake in the world is sitting in Zimbabwe. It's called Kariba Lake. What is stopping that whole body of work, several million cubic meters, from flowing through into the river and beyond? It is because there's a wall with gates. This is limiting from the other side, from the river side of it, not suspecting anything, not knowing anything about engineering and dams and what have you. Unseen, a body of water sitting behind, we only deal with what we are seeing. But if we open the floodgates, in other words, if we allow these limiting adjuncts to be expressive, to be adapters, we'll find the full glory of what is behind there. And that will indicate that even though it's invisible, even though it's unseen, we know this huge body of water sits behind it. And we're just lifting up the floodgates. Last week, or maybe it was with the Lisbon group, I mentioned this idea taken from Patanjali Yoga Sutras, that good and bad deeds are not the direct causes of transformations. It's simply, spiritual practice is opening the floodgates, removing the obstacles. That is, in Shankaracharya's language, removing the limiting adjuncts, the things that are limiting this imperishable entity, this unseen. And when we remove that, then the full meaning of these Mahavakyas occur. So this is something anyway about the Mahavakyas, not all the full Mahavakyas, but we can take other things also as Mahavakyas. The full Mahavakyas would be some of which I have mentioned. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. But we won't understand that until we've understood this background I've given. Tattvamasi, thou art Brahman. Prajnanam Brahma. Prajnanam Brahma, consciousness is Brahman. It's not reduced to a simple mindless entity. Consciousness itself is Brahman. That is why we think. Ayam Atma Brahma. This self is Brahman. This internal self underlying everything is Brahman. Don't think that you are an unfortunate creature. The full glory of yourself is unknown. Sarvam Kalu Idam Brahma. All this is truly Brahman. All of it. Even that which is manifested. Even that which seems to be restricted. The water that flows through from the dam restrictions. Even that is water nonetheless. Now this vision of this oneness of everything encapsulated in this way through these Mahavakyas, we can use as repetitions for the sense of oneness. But when you feel this oneness, you've removed all the world's problems. Every single one. When people ask me, oh, what about my karma? I'm worried about my karma. My life is a mess and I need to adjust things. At that point, it's clear to see they don't understand this oneness. Oh, I'm worried, I'm fearful. Only because you never understood these Mahavakyas. You never understood this oneness. You understood this oneness, there's nothing to be worried about. Oh, I'm fearful. What? If there's oneness, where's the fear? So it's understanding these Mahavakyas that is difficult. So when we repeat these, we should meditate on their meaning. And the passage from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad will give some indication of the approach that can be taken at the fundamental level. And also indicates how to get there by taking note of the indicators that we call upadhis and tracing them back, tracing the flow back to the source of the flow. that in this Upanishad is described as command. By its command is the language. That is the commander and what is being commanded. And the whole process in between is only one without a second. So all things, this oneness is the emphasis in these Upanishads. The oneness is not there necessarily, except in a physical sense, in the other portions of the Vedas. But in the Upanishads, it is the one crucial thing. There is only one entity. And with this one entity, this self is one with this. And everything else is an expression of it, is something like a cloud in between. So we have to take very seriously that all of this is Brahman. That sarvam kalu idam brahma, all of this is truly Brahman. So let us learn to meditate on these things and this sense of oneness. And by all means, repeat the Mahavakyas, but we have to understand it in the context of the Upanishads. So now 12:10. I went on longer than I should have, but there was an interruption previously. So we leave it at that. So we finish off again by repeating Happy Mother's Day. Enjoy the rest of your day. And when you go out and about and see all the flora and fauna around you, the grass and the sunshine, I don't know if there's sunshine today, I think there is, I'm just looking out of the window, yes. Then you can reflect everything that you see is a reflection of this one entity that is expressing itself. And the more we're in tune with that, the more our troubles, so-called troubles and difficulties fade away by themselves. Indirectly, in an indirect approach to the practical difficulties of life. See, like if you want to make friends with a horse, don't approach it head on. Approach it from the side and put your hand out, let it smell and lick a little bit and stroke the air, even that might require a bit, till it gets used to you. It gets used to your smell. So from the side, you're doing it. So the whole of these practical resolutions to difficulties are done indirectly. All right. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.